Welcome everybody to another video from Robotic Mower Services. Before we get into the main subject here, just want to apologize if you hear that buzzing in the background. There's a fan on because it's 100 degrees here with a lot of humidity, deep in the heart of Amish country here, and I am just not built for it anymore. But we got to get this video done because we got a lot of information we've got to put out there for everybody to understand what's going on here with these cutting systems. You know, a lot of misinformation out there, and we just thought, well, we definitely need to get this all wrangled back in and put everybody on the same page, and that way we can go start figuring out what's actually going on and what's causing the issues that people are having, and understand everything a little bit better. So we're going to start with what we have here. This is, you flip the mower over, this is what you're going to see. You've got this cap in the center held on by 3 screws. You've got a skid plate. You got the cutting disc. In between the skid plate and the cutting disc, you have a bearing hub assembly. And then inside the mower, you have the actual cutting motor. So this setup right here, this is the newest version from Husqvarna, where we have a smaller skid plate than the cutting disc. The cutting disc is slightly larger. This way that there's more of the blade cutting edge that's exposed past the skid plate. You got to figure if this is upside down, the grass is going to be poking this way. So you want more of the blade showing, so the grass can get past the skid plate, easier to get cut by the blades. This is definitely a better design. If you still have the old design where you have the skid plate that's bigger than your cutting disc, you should really change that. And if you're not sure what to get, to change that over, you can go to our website, www.roboticmowerservices.com. We sell everything in a kit. So you get the new skid plate, you get the new style, you get the new style skid plate, you get the new cutting disc, and you get the actual proper hardware to assemble it, because you want to make sure you have the right hardware on there to mount the cutting disc, or it's going to screw everything up. We'll get into that at a later time, or you can just go back and watch the video that we already made showing all that information. So the old style, like I was just saying there, you have a skid plate that's actually larger than the cutting disc. So if you're looking straight down on this, you wouldn't even see the cutting disc because it'd be hidden behind that skid plate. Two of the main reasons why they switched to this design is, as I said, with the smaller skid plate, you have more of the blade cutting surface exposed, making it able to cut more grass, increasing the capacity. It's doing a better overall job with the cutting. The second reason is when you have more material on your skid plate, the further out it goes from the center, putting more material on there and bringing that out further and further, the more leverage can be had out here, making it easier for this to get pushed down into the cutting disc. And that's not what you want, because the main purpose of this skid plate, as you can see here, rotational momentum enhancement device, is to help the cutting disc stay at the correct speed without having to increase its amperage, and that'll give you a better overall cutting performance. If the skid plate wasn't here, everything in the grass itself would be pushing against this, and it'd be like applying a brake to this cutting disc. It'd slow it down. It would make it have to make the mower have to put more current to it, higher amperage to keep it spinning at a high RPM to be able to cut the grass, and it's going to make it struggle. So with the skid plate here, this is going to block everything from getting into the cutting disc and slowing it down. A lot of people think it's just there in case it runs up on a log or a rock or something like that, but to a certain extent, yes. But it's also there to protect it from everything else, including the grass, the thick clumps of grass and all that stuff. And what a lot of people don't realize is this skid plate, this is not powered. Your cutting disc is powered because it's fastened directly to the shaft for the cutting motor. So when the cutting motor spins, this cutting disc is going to spin with that shaft. Like, it has to spin at the same RPM as that cutting motor because it's fastened directly to it. This has the bearing in between. And yes, the bolt for the bearing that holds the bearing hub assembly goes into the shaft of the motor, but the bearing allows the skid plate to spin freely of the cutting disc. As you can see here, if we bring her here, we got the blue tape on her. You can see that. Like they can spin independently of each other. And that's the whole purpose of the skid plate, is to allow the cutting motor to stay at the proper speed while using as little current as possible, which will extend the battery runtime for that cycle and give you a better quality of cut. If you have the other setup on there, like I was just talking about, where you have a larger skid plate and a smaller cutting disc, and your skid plate is hitting those thick clumps of grass and stuff, and it's being pushed up into the cutting disc, because remember, when it's further out there from the center, all those objects are going to have more leverage to push that down. Then you're slowing down the cutting disc because you've got the skid plate itself pushing against the screws and the surface here. So now your cutting motor is trying to spin everything together, and that's not what you want, because that's more drag, that's more friction on there, and it's just not gonna cut as well. That's when you get the times where the mower's gonna back up and go a different direction if it's one of these ones that moves randomly, or your EPOS mower's gonna back up and then try to get lined up again to hit it again. And you could end up with those just thick spots in your grass that don't get cut for a while because the mower's got to fight its way through there. Little things like that really add up to the performance of the mower and are what create the cutting system blocked errors. And we get a lot of emails about that. You know, people will say, I got a cutting system blocked error over and over again, but I don't see anything there. I guess I just need a new cutting motor. Well, hold on. You know, it's not just a matter of checking and saying, there's nothing in there. You got to see what else is going on. You got to look for other signs. You got to look in your yard, you know, check your grass, your soil, and that kind of stuff to see if there's ruts that are allowing the motor to drop down where the skid plate is being pushed against the cutting disc then. Little things like that really add up to extra resistance on that cutting motor, and that's why you get the error saying that the cutting system is blocked, because the motor is trying to spin all of it and it can't. So it's blocked, whether it's by one thing or two things or something that you can't even see because you just picked the mower up now and don't understand like what happened. I know this is a lot to take in, and just hearing it, you know, and me just going turn this little stuff here makes this hard to understand. So the reason we have this setup here is so I can actually show you what I'm talking about. And before I do this, I gotta warn you, do not try this at home. Even if you're a dealer, do not try this at your dealership or at your home. Don't do it. Just watch this video, but don't do it. We're going to show you here what happens. You know, you got the cutting disc that will be spinning, and we'll show you what the skid plate should be doing then when something pushes against it, and go over all that stuff. So here we go. We're going to go in here and we're going to start the cutting motor, and bear with me just a second. Cutting motor, here we go. Ready? Now you'll see the skid plate is spinning with the cutting disc there, just because there's nothing preventing it from doing that. It's just free spinning. But as soon as there's grass or something, an object in the way, the whole point of this skid plate is to prevent it from getting to the cutting disc, so the skid plate can stop in order for the cutting disc to keep on spinning. You can spin this cutting disc whatever way you want, and it doesn't change that cutting disc. You know, the skid plate is just free to do its own thing. It can sit still, and the cutting disc just keeps going and going and going. So this skid plate could literally be a triangle or an octagon or square, and it would still serve the same purpose. It should still do the same thing, where it stops, it doesn't spin, so that the cutting disc can keep spinning. Obviously, the reason they made it round is because square, triangle, octagon, whatever, you'd have sharp corners that would catch on stuff and jam it into the cutting disc like that. So hopefully that makes sense to you now. You understand that this skid plate is not supposed to rotate with the motor. If it is warped, it's not a big deal, because it's going to go out there in the grass and it's going to get pushed and flexed in all different directions from the thick clumps of grass, from objects in the ground, toys that are laying there, sidewalks, curbs, whatever else it's running up over. But But the main goal is for it to not touch the cutting disc and not let anything else touch the cutting disc to slow it down. Follow me there? So it's just that simple, it's that basic. You know, if you have a problem with your skid plate, obviously you need to replace it. When I say you have a problem with it, here's one of those things that we would consider a problem. You can see where this is the older one, where it was much bigger, and you can see how easy it was to get flexed into the screws and everything, and that's why we end up with this. And you can tell that it was just doing it obviously on one side. Let's see it here, but yeah, it was just doing it on this one side here, because this is the side it was getting flexed into the screws. And it's not that this was spinning around against the screws, it's that the screws were spinning around on this. The screws were spinning, this was sitting still, and that's why it cut into that. So at that point there, you replace the skid plate, but this is an obvious sign, like I said, where it was just one side constantly getting pushed against more than the other one, and that's why that wore out. If you have an issue where you flip your mower over and you're changing the blades or whatever, and you just give this a spin that skid plate, and you hear it rubbing against the screws or something like that, what you can do is you can just grab that, and you can just put your thumbs in the center, grab out here at the edges, and just pull up on it slightly. And pull it away, and then just spin it around again so you don't hear anything rubbing. It's going to go out there, it's going to get flexed, it's going to get pushed around. That is going to happen. We suggest that every 2 times you change the blades, flip that skid plate over. It's real simple to do. You just take these 3 screws out here, and this actually makes changing the blades a lot easier too, because they're easier to get to than going through the holes in the skid plate. But we'll take these out here. Take these out of here, flip this over, because now if it's been on there for a while and it's starting to get bowed, you know, from stuff pushing it in towards the cutting disc, now when you flip it over, it's going to be bowed the opposite way, and now it won't be rubbing as well. But again, you put that back on there and you spin it around by hand, and you hear it rubbing the screws. Just put your thumbs in the middle there, pull up one a little bit, straighten it out. This happens all the time. We get brand new mowers in that are doing that because the way they were shipped in the box, or the way they've sat in the box for several years before they actually did get shipped out. Little things like that. It's a common occurrence. We'll also get that, you know, with shipping. You know, ones that we ship out to customers, ones that we get shipped in from Husqvarna to us will end up that way. You know, real simple to fix. You just saw how I did that there. That's really all you got to do to keep the skid plate from rubbing the screws, because it's not a matter of the skid plate being balanced, because it's not rotating with the shaft. So your skid plate is not going to cause your cutting motor imbalance issues and stuff like that. The majority of the time that this thing is in the grass, this skid plate is probably not even spinning, because the grass is pushing against it and keeping it from spinning. It doesn't take much when the cutting motor is spinning and your bearing assembly is good for this to be stopped. Because again, that's the whole point of it. This is to be stopped. Cutting disc is to be able to keep on going. Now, speaking of your bearing hub assembly, that's this part right here that the skid plate fastens to. If the bearings go bad, then that will lock this in place, and then you could have the whole skid plate, bearing assembly, everything trying to rotate together on the shaft with your cutting motor. That's going to put extra drag on there. That's going to cause the motor to need extra current going to the cutting motor. That is going to give you an error. If you have this all together, and let's put some screws in here so I can show you what I'm talking about. If you change your blades, you flip this thing over, and you're just checking everything out, and you want to make sure everything's good to go before you put it back here in your yard, because you've had a cutting motor overload issue or two, or your mower seems like it's making a weird noise that it didn't make before when it's in the areas where the grass isn't as thick or isn't as heavy. You know, it's got this notable new noise to it. What you want to do is you want to take this skid plate and you want to hold your cutting motor and just spin it. And if you don't hear anything like this, that bearing hub assembly, that's good to go. If you go like that and you spin that, you hear the bearings are going bad in that hub assembly, you should replace it. Why should you replace the whole thing and not just the bearings? Well, because if you're doing this properly and you're taking these screws out and you're rotating that disc and you're making sure everything's cleaned out in there, you've got steel screws going into plastic threads in that hub assembly. If you replace the whole thing, you've got a whole fresh new plastic hub assembly to run your screws down into. So it's not worn. You know, you gotta remember, this is gonna take some vibration down here. So if you've got holes that are worn, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, you get vibration, these screws will back out if those holes are worn. Or if you just cross thread them in there because you gotta use that power tool to put them in there. You know, you don't want to take our advice and use a screwdriver. You just want to just zip them right in there with that power equipment. It's gonna wear those threads out and stuff. So best bet is to replace that whole hub assembly underneath there. Really hope all this stuff is making sense to you guys. I'm trying to remember it as I go here again. My brain is fried because it is hot as hell outside here. And we're just trying to get this done as quickly as possible so we can get the fans turned back on, more of them than just the one over there in the corner. But you get what I'm saying now. The skid plate, this is not going to cause your imbalance. What's going to cause your imbalance is the cutting motor mounted to the cutting motor shaft. I'm sorry, the cutting disc mounted to the cutting motor shaft, because that's what's spinning. This will get held still out in the grass, so this is not going to be spinning, so it's not going to be out of balance because there's nothing spinning there. This is what would be spinning and could be out of balance. Cutting motor overload, yes, this could affect that if you have a spot where you end up with something like this, where your screws from your blades get lodged in here, and now it's trying to spin this whole thing with the cutting motor. Yeah, that's going to put an overload on there because now you're spinning everything together, plus you have the friction of whatever the skid plate is rubbing against, trying to spin against the motor, and it's going to take no time at all for that to say, we're not putting that much power into this anymore, just shut her down. Also with that, if your mower comes up to a thick clump of grass, that will also cause it to back up, go a different way, because it knows there's just too much resistance there. Little things like that you got to look at. And if you start to see that groove getting worn into your skid plate, then you know something's going on there, and that's where you want to just give it the little flex up, keep it away from them screws, and then send it out there to do its thing again. I think that's pretty much it. I know I'm probably forgetting a bunch of stuff that we wanted to go over, but I think that's pretty much it for this part right here that we wanted to show you. Now I'm going to move on to something else that I've heard people saying about that just blows my mind. The cutting discs. The newer ones from Husqvarna. This is a 5-blade. Doesn't matter if it's 3-blade, 5-blade, whatever. When you get these brand new, you will see that there are spots there where this hole in the center, it's not a perfect circle. You can hear that when I go around here, like it's hitting on those little nubs. That is not going to affect this cutting disc because it's not a pressed fit. It's not pressing on that shaft. It's held on with 3 screws. So these 3 mounting screws, you want to make sure that they're on there properly. But just because that center hole is not a perfect circle is not going to cause this to wobble or anything like that and hit this skid plate. Again, the cutting disc is mounted with the 3 screws. They use flange-headed screws, so they're just pressed down. This thing is pressed down tight against that flange on the cutting motor with nowhere to go. The only way that this is going to start to wobble is if those screws come out, and everything else is going to have to move underneath it too for it to have room to move around. So if you're getting that error saying there's cutting motor imbalance or something like that, you want to look for broken blade screws, broken blades, bent blades, missing blades. That's going to be your main cause of that. When it comes to the cutting motor overload, then again, now you're going to look for stuff pushing against the cutting disc and bogging it down, slowing it down, whether it's something you can see there or you just, it's a hole out in the yard that it ran into and that's what caused it. It's not going to be the cutting disc itself that's actually overloading the motor. It's going to be whatever's going against the cutting motor, or I'm sorry, against the cutting disc and slowing down the cutting disc and the motor itself. I think that's pretty much it now for that. We went over all this. If we think of more, we'll just make another video, right? Because that's what we do. But if anybody has any questions on this, you couldn't follow this, you're not quite sure what I'm saying, you didn't understand the video that we just, or the little demonstration we did there, showing this, how this should not move, but this will move and all that good stuff. If you're confused about the skid plate versus cutting disc, which one you have on your mower, which one you don't have on your mower, which one you should get, you know how to get a hold of us. Go to our website, www.roboticmowerservices.com. You can go in there and you can find a lot of this information. You can find videos in there under the parts themselves, the skid plates, the cutting discs, and that kind of stuff. We have video links, with our 3-blade and 5-blade cutting disc kits that we put on there. If you don't see what you're looking for on a website, like we always tell you, just reach out to us. Email's the best way. info@roboticmowerservices.com or tech support@roboticmowerservices.com. Please make sure to include the model and serial number of your mower when you're reaching out to us about the issues that you're having or the questions that you have. Even if it's something for the right parts, it doesn't matter. Make sure to include model number and serial number for your mower so we can better assist you and get you the right parts, get you the right help, get you the right answers for everything you're trying to do and all the problems you're trying to solve. Yeah, I know I probably rambled on about this video here for quite a while. This is like the 17th time now we tried to get this done, and we just got to get it done and get it out there because, again, it's roasting in here, and I need to go sit in front of the fan, sit in the AC, get something to drink, and just get a little bit of time to chill out here before we got to get started on more mowers again. So, again, you know how to find us, www.roboticmowerservices.com. That's going to do it for this video here. As always, thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel.